Kagurabachi has the potential to go down as one of the best manga from a sword fighting perspective. Today, I want to go over exactly why that's the case and how I think this series has mastered its sword fights. When it comes to making any good fight in manga, in this instance specifically a sword fight, there are a few different aspects of writing and illustration that come into play, but there are two that I want to focus on today. The first and most obvious to anyone watching this video is the spectacle. How does the fight look, move, and flow when reading, and how exciting is it to actually experience the action going on in front of you? From this perspective, Kagurabachi is and has been elite since its inception. Whether the fights revolve around Chihiro fighting nameless cannon fodder or other enchanted blade wielders like Sojo, Hokazono has a knack for seamlessly linking intricate sword movements and choreography into his chapters with ease. There is a palpable power and ferocity that is present in many fights throughout this manga that is often paired with extreme moments of delicacy and grace in others. As the name of the story implies, fights in Kagurabachi feel like an intricate yet aggressive dance between combatants. And in my mind, this is exactly how sword fighting should be illustrated in manga. When looking for the described intensity, you need look no further than the first chapter of the story itself. The first display of Chihiro and intense power, and the moment that gave many fans of the manga hope that this series would survive the infamous Shonen Jump axe. Now, despite the art being much less refined than it would end up being in only a few chapters, sparks of Kagurabachi's brilliant choreography and cinematic angles would shine through. Spinning slashes that are shown from above are enhanced by the flowing of Chihiro's trench coat and splattering blood following his line of motion. Arms shown flying through the air from up close while Chihiro is cutting down foes, and powerful panels showing him shrouded in darkness and blood depict the true violence that is occurring before our eyes. This very savage artistry is really important for a series like Kagurabachi in order to make clear just how lethal the blades being wielded are. Now, I want to continue focusing on the general choreography and elegance of Kagurabachi fights in general, but one aspect of sword fighting in this series and many other sword-centric manga that I want to highlight is the specific way that brutality is exhibited. Contrary to fights that focus primarily on hand-to-hand combat, a sword fight can end much more swiftly and almost always will result in bigger and more flashy injuries. These bladed weapons must be made to feel distinct from those who do not have them, and in Kagurabachi, this is largely achieved through a hyper-violent flurry of limbs and blood. This isn't something exclusive to Kagurabachi either. Some of the most well-respected and well-known sword-fighting manga like Vagabond, Bleach, and the much lesser-known Gameran all incorporate this into their combat because of how useful of a tool it is to distinguish itself from other battle shonen. Bleach goes about accomplishing this by showing off splash pages with impossible amounts of blood gushing from wounds, while Vagabond takes a much more measured approach, still depicting moments of violence viscerally, but also showing off the lethality of these fights by demonstrating how quickly a duel can be concluded. One moment Musashi is standing in front of a new challenger, and the next, the battle is over, with a sword being drawn, usually being the prelude to a quick death in this manga. Kagurabachi geniusly combines some of these unique visual attributes from the aforementioned manga to create a unique fighting atmosphere and sense of danger from Chihiro and from his enemies, resulting in spreads like this, where he's just mowing down armies of opponents with a single slash from Enten, or slightly more grounded scenes where his speed is utilized to take the arm of a fighter without them even noticing. The more grounded quickness of a sword fight, combined with Bleach's rather dramatic style of clashing, allows Kagurabachi to enjoy the benefits of both styles of writing. This may seem somewhat contradictory to some, but a fantastically grounded battle shonen isn't all that new conceptually. The most popular and currently relevant manga that fall into this category in my mind would probably be Hunter x Hunter and Jujutsu Kaisen. While both stories quite obviously allow characters to do things far beyond the scope of normal humans, the authors are able to maintain a pretty good connection to some basic understandings and limitations of the real world to further connect us to the consequences of a hard fight. Essentially, Kagurabachi gets double dip, having its cake and eating it with realistic violence and fantastical sword fighting elements. The lethality made present in these combat sequences is simultaneously exciting and very satisfying, but it isn't all that Kagurabachi fights are. See, as I mentioned earlier, there is a grace and refinement that these fights tend to have that continues to add to their appeal, and you can pick from almost any Chihiro fight to see what it is that I'm talking about. As it stands, Chihiro is a very acrobatic and fluid swordsman who relies on his extra mobility to catch his opponents unaware and cut them down without much resistance. In instances where his enemies can actually match his mobility, speed, and cutting power though, we get to see two characters put all of their chips on the table as they try to outmaneuver the other, which Hokazono is once again able to absolutely nail. Both of Chihiro's fights with Sojo make this point for me. In their first battle specifically, the battle of both Cloud Gouger and Enten are shown through the clashing of their blades, but more interestingly, It's the speed granted to both characters by the enchanted weapons they wield here that seems to take center stage. It's a small sequence, sure, but this page where Sojo and Chihiro both run out of the buildings that they are in before leaping out of frame and flying through the air with their respective powers is phenomenal. It's a moment that is completely unnecessary to getting to the main point of this fight, but Hokazono's appreciation for action and extreme attention to detail grants us the privilege of seeing dozens of small touches like this snowballing to create an exciting and easily followable reading experience. Once again, angles come to play in this fight, and in all honesty, I think manipulating perspective and giving us cinematic angles to experience these fights through is one of Hokazono's greatest strengths as an artist. This makes perfect sense when you understand that Kishimoto and his work with Naruto was a massive inspiration to Kagurabachi and Hokazono's own artistic journey. I mean, time after time after time, we are just fed unique and interesting points of view that pull us into the fight in ways that would otherwise be impossible. The speed, power, and precision of slashes and counter slashes like this just wouldn't come through as clearly if Hokazono was any less competent and confident with his illustrations. This fact doesn't just ring true for big battles like Chihiro versus Sojo, by the way. Smaller encounters get that same love and deliberate effort all the time. While I would certainly say the heavy reliance on perspective and angles is reminiscent of Naruto, there is also a very potent framing found in Kagurabachi that somewhat reminds me of Bleach. This isn't to say that Kagurabachi is quite on the level of either of these series yet visually, but it's so obvious that he respects the titans of manga that came before him, and that movies, comics, and manga remain his biggest inspirations for his vast visual library. Hokazono, much like Kubo, is an artist that I would consider very stylish. While his references are quite clear, he has a strong visual style that has remained rather consistent throughout his publishing thus far, and it just leads to some of the coolest stuff I've seen in a while. Chihiro cutting these grenades? The perfect example of an absolutely jaw-dropping moment for me. This whole chapter was, actually, because the setting and surrounding context just allowed for some insane bursts of movement and dynamic action, but it was this two-page sequence in particular that really had me realizing that Hokazono was the one. Again. I had kinda already realized this with Chihiro vs. Sojo round 2, but if that moment somehow wasn't enough to convince you of his artistic ability, this elaborate movement made clearer than crystal that Kagurabachi truly valued creativity, flair, and choreography in its fights. And you know the funniest thing? Even if you thought that I was just gassing this manga and exaggerating for whatever reason, Kagurabachi has gotten the seal of approval from some of the most skilled mangaka in recent history that just adds to the credibility of the fights that much more. Takehiko Inoue, for example, the author of Vagabond himself, praised Kagurabachi highly for its action sequences and how much the fun of drawing and art came through in his illustrations. Vagabond is essentially perfect from an artistic perspective, and the fact that one of the most prolific authors and artists in the space thought so highly of a manga that also focuses on sword fighting is one of the greatest cosigns Kagurabachi could get. If that wasn't enough, somehow, Kishimoto and Horikoshi have both gone on record praising Kagurabachi as a whole, but also specifically the art quality of the manga. Horikoshi being enamored by Kagurabachi's composition and framing, and Kishimoto highlighting the power and emotion that can be found in Hokazono's art are some of the most impressive things any upcoming manga creator has had said about them. I mean, come on, man. Horikoshi said that Hokazono knows what it means to be cool based almost solely off the quality of Kagurabachi's art. Even dismissing all of the analysis and appreciation from a personal standpoint, some of the greats in the industry are able to acknowledge this manga for what it's doing visually, and that shouldn't go unsaid in a video like this. Now, I mentioned that there were two aspects of Kagurabachi fights that were the primary contributors to its quality. While I could go on and on about how good these fights look in motion, there is still the second aspect to account for. And the way I would describe what it is that elevates these fights even further is framing. In part, the visual aspect, but also how the narrative, character, or emotional aspects of any given battle are set up beforehand. If you don't understand what I mean, simply think about Ichigo versus Kenpachi as an amazing example of narrative framing. For the first half of the Soul Society arc, it's made clear to Ichigo that the one person he should never fight is Kenpachi. Doing so would be no more than committing suicide and throwing not only his life, but the lives of his friend and his mission away. Over and over and over again, Kenpachi is gassed up to be a monster beyond reproach, a Shinigami in the most literal sense, a god of death that lives up to the hype. Upon meeting Kenpachi, his aura is so intense that Ichigo imagines being killed before a sword is even swung, being almost incapable of imagining victory at the start of this fight. This is an example of how the framing of a battle can impact the quality of viewers' reading experience before anything has even happened. And in Kagurabachi, I think this narrative framing is very consistently high quality. Now, I've mentioned Sojo versus Chihiro numerous times in this video because it acts as an amazing example to point to when discussing how great of an artist Hokazono is, but it's also demonstrative of how excellent of a writer he is as well. The build up to the rematch between Enchanted Blade wielders starts halfway through chapter 16, yet by the end of it, I feel like this could be the final battle of a manga and still be built up properly. Chihiro and Sojo are both burdened by the damage from their previous battles and high off the power of their newly awakened abilities from connecting with their respective blades. The level of focus achieved by both characters detailed by the narrator, the level of damage that they sustained contrasting it. Like an old western, Hokazono shows them standing apart, first with the context of the surroundings, then focusing exclusively on them, blocking out all unnecessary distractions, blocking out everything but these two swordsmen preparing to clash. As both fighters gear up to face one another, the narrator tells us the condition of both fighters, and that in a mere moment, this battle would conclude, finally ending the chapter with a simple 2-panel page. The first showing both swordsmen charging up their blades, and the next with them gone from the frame, initiating the fight at speeds we aren't even meant to comprehend, with only 12 seconds left on the clock. Holy shit, man. What a way to kick off a fight. Even in only recounting the events, I feel myself get goosebumps. But that first read of chapter 16 was generational. The way Hokazono sets a tone is insane, and because of how good he is at actually following his buildup with detailed and masterful combat, that buildup is paid off and then some every single time. The framing of the fight exists to elevate reader expectations and excitement, while also placing us directly into the minds of the characters themselves. This fight happens to be my personal favorite instance of this, but Kagurabachi has plenty that achieve the same thing to varying degrees. Chihiro's awakening, Mei's shred, the pulling together of Cloud Gouger, and rescue of everyone within the Rakuzaichi all perfectly embody what it is that I'm talking about. In each and every moment mentioned, the actual reveal or climax is only as good as it is because of how much is placed into setting these conflicts up. None of Chihiro's awakenings in relation to the Enchanted Blades work without the proper conflict and struggle shown before. This page of Chihiro transitioning between his past and present is aggravatingly genius, and because of that, when we get that last spread debuting Kuro Shred, I'm able to enjoy it that much more. Now, it's no secret that proper buildup is necessary for the payoff to land. I mean, this is writing 101. But Kagurabachi not only excels at this in a way that is deeply satisfying, but even the way that it's done oozes style unique to the manga. The best way that I could say it is that it's just cool. Like authentic, genuine, and emotional, but still cool. The edgiest moments of Bleach, paired with the most vulnerable, almost cornily emotional parts of Naruto, put into a blender and spat onto a beautifully illustrated page is how I would describe Kagurabachi's unique coolness. Is that analogy somewhat insane in terms of concept and also high praise? Perhaps. But I bet I painted a better picture of how I view Hokazono's framing than simply describing it as cool as I was before. This vibe applies not only to things pertaining to the plot, but the emotion and development of characters within this story. And without Hokazono's proclivity to be the coolest guy ever, the action sequences and even more mundane moments of writing in Kagurabachi would greatly suffer. It's only because the balance works so well in this manga that I can confidently say Kagurabachi has mastered sword fights. I know it hasn't even been 50 chapters by the time I make this video, and I know it may seem like to some that this is just recency bias, but I honestly couldn't care less. In less than a year's time, Hokazono has made me more impressed with some of the fights present in this manga than I have been with many other long-running battle shonen that have gone on for 5+ years. And the beauty of it all in my eyes is that I know he'll get even better, even more competent, more expansive with his visual library, and above all else, better at penning Kagurabachi. I yearn to see more of Kagurabachi's evolution as a manga artistically, but even as it is now, I'm more than satisfied with the quality of Kagurabachi's fights. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more Kagurabachi videos, subscribe, hit the bell, and check out this playlist full of Kagurabachi content. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.